welcome to Beating a Dead Horse, where we tell you who lived, who died, and who deserved to die. I'm Sean McKinda.
And I'm Jackson Keller.
And for the next 4 weeks, that's right, 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about the DC Cinematic Universe, which some people love it, some people hate it.
A lot of people hate it.
Most of us just don't care about it. So, with that, we're going to open up with a conversation about the first movie in the DC Cinematic Universe, Man of Steel. Now, please note, this is not your daddy's Superman. This is a Superman with death, destruction, and darkness. This is the DC Cinematic Universe. Now, I have not seen this movie before like 2 days ago, so I'm gonna let Jackson take us off with his in-theater thoughts of it, and then kind of his more recent thoughts.
Yeah, it's been a long time since Man of Steel has come out, and that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about it, because I know on this very podcast, it keeps coming up. I keep bringing it up just because it's become such a cornerstone of the discussion around, like, superhero movies and American blockbusters in general. So I think it's important to go back and revisit it, or maybe not important, but definitely interesting. So, if you would, though, think back to, like, 2013. This would have been the year after the first Avengers came out, when, like, everyone was feeling the superhero movie thing. The Avengers was a big old, like, blockbuster phenomenon, like the third highest grossing movie or whatever at the time. It was a ridiculous success, and most people really loved it. I mean, obviously there were some people who thought it was shitty, but, like, as a culture, the Avengers was the new hotness. And so, I, being a, like, college freshman, in the lead up, I still would have been, like, a high school boy, like tail end of high school, looking at the trailers for Man of Steel, and the trailers looked really good. What the trailers were basically selling us was the idea that they're going to do what Batman Begins did for Batman, but for Superman. Give it a grounded, kind of realistic take, but in doing so, get to the core of what's important or interesting about the character. Batman Begins was at its best when it was exploring the philosophy of Batman, and worse when Liam Neeson was trying to gas a city. So, I was all on board. Superman was a character that, at the time especially, he's become a bit more controversial now, considering his most recent films, but at the time, he had been seen as kind of, boring and played out, and, like, not really relevant anymore, and I thought that, this was an exciting idea, to take this sort of older, washed-up character and prove that he's still got some life in him. Well, Man of Steel didn't really do that, and as a college freshman when it finally came out, I watched it, and I really, really wanted to like it. And I walked out of the movie even saying, like, wow, like, that was great. But the more that I thought about it, and the more that I really considered what had just happened, the more I was like, I mean, that wasn't really great. But it had its good moments. It had its saving graces. I really was in this movie's corner, just because, I don't know, I wanted it to succeed. I had already been, kind of burned by The Dark Knight Rises. I really hated that movie, and so I wanted a, like, good DC, like, competition to the Marvel movies. Like, again, we were, like, riding high on, like, the Avengers. It should have been, like, a glorious, like, golden age of superhero movies, but then Man of Steel came and changed everything, not necessarily for the better. And going back to it more recently, I still think it's an interesting movie in a lot of ways, but it is totally fucking incoherent. Everything about it, from the character motivations to the themes, to the action, it is just a piping hot mess. And yeah, and that's basically where we're at. But it's a mess that's gone on to inform a lot of blockbusters. So time to start digging through the trash.
I went into this movie without the same excitement that Jackson did. Even if I had seen this in high school, I would not have cared about it. I was a giant comic nerd throughout high school. I read basically everything, especially DC was putting out. That was during the whole Brightest Day, Blackest Night event happening, which was my bar none favorite comic event that I've ever read. And I could not be asked to give a shit about Superman. For whatever reason, his character, his powers, whatever, were just uninteresting to me. The one exception to that is I kind of liked him during Final Crisis, if you know what I'm talking about. There's an interesting part where he inhabits like a giant robot body, I think. Comics are weird.
Oh, the Thought Robot!
Yeah.
Sorry, I only know about that because I hang out on, I like to read people debate about fictional characters fighting each other, and that comes up a lot. So,
okay.
So the more you know.
There we go. I have confirmation that this is, in fact, not some sort of horrible hallucination.
You didn't make it up. Please continue.
At any rate, the point that you're supposed to take from this is I do not care about Superman. So I have waited 4 years to watch this movie. And honest to God, if we weren't doing this podcast, I never would have seen it, in all likelihood. It just is not something I want to watch. I might have gone and seen Batman vs. Superman just because the girlfriend and I like to watch bad movies and weep silently amongst ourselves. So that could have been seen. This one wouldn't have been. So when I go into it 4 years down the road, I tried to take an open mind with it. I tried to be accepting of what it had to offer and embrace it like it's a movie that I would like. I left bored. It's about the nicest thing I can say of it. It wasn't a bad movie. It's not like Death Note or something along those lines where it's clearly abysmal. It's just kind of uninspired. A lot of the cinematography is very predictable, very exactly what you expect it to be. It felt like a Transformers movie to me in a lot of ways, which are enjoyably uninteresting. This was just predictable and boring. Once again, though, I can't call it bad. It's not outright bad. It's a fine Saturday afternoon, watch it while you're doing something else type of movie.
I guess it's worth mentioning because I only sort of alluded to this, but I do have more fondness for Superman as a character. I'm not like a big fan. I haven't read very many comics at all. But I did grow up like watching the Christopher Reeve movies, as a lot of people did, and I enjoyed those as a kid. They weren't like a cornerstone of my childhood, but they did give me a fondness for the character. So this was a movie that I was invested in more than just as a comic book movie or as a competitor to Marvel in the interest of like business. This is a roundabout way of saying that I am indeed invested in the idea of Superman as a character, which I think in these kind of conversations is an important thing to clarify, because Superman is, again, to this day, very divisive, not being helped by the fact that these movies are kind of utter dog shit.
With our own personal feelings out of the way, now that you have an idea on how we're going into this movie, how we're kind of watching Superman, whether we love him or could not give less of a shit about him, we're going to jump into spoilers, and we're going to start talking about who dies and who doesn't die. So, as per usual, let's open up in the beginning, or rather 20 minutes down the road in the beginning, because there's an extended opening scene, and oh my god, is it an extended opening scene. It is only 20 minutes or so. I thought it felt like an hour.
Well, for a prologue, 20 minutes is ridiculous. It's basically, I mean, this is a long-ass movie. It's like 2.5 hours. But if you think about, like, your standard, like, 90-minute to 2-hour movie, like, that's not an insubstantial chunk of film to dedicate to a bunch of characters only 2 of which are going to be even vaguely important.
Yeah, it's Krypton, which means everyone on it dies. You've just spent 20 minutes setting up an exploding planet for some unknown reason. I hate to throw it out like this, but it's very much along the lines of the Spider-Man story. We all know what happens. Everyone knows who Superman is. Everyone knows that he came from a planet called Krypton that exploded. We don't need 20 minutes of exposition to get us to Earth. And yes, you can say that, oh, well, how did the Codex get in them then? I don't know. Figure out a way to do it in under 20 minutes.
So this brings up the inevitability of Krypton's demise. Kind of brings up a structural problem that the movie consistently has, in that it wants to be so many things and doesn't do a particularly good job being any of them. Because we do know how Krypton is going to be destroyed. But, as I mentioned earlier, we also knew that Batman's parents were going to get shot. Even back with Batman Begins, like, everyone knew that origin story because the Tim Burton films were, like, a big enough of a hit. Like, culturally, we know what happens to the Batman. But in Batman Begins, the fact that they kind of explore the characters and really, like, illustrate the kind of impact this has on Bruce as, like, protagonist, it doesn't feel quite so by the numbers. Whereas, and I almost said whereas this does, and the strange thing is that it doesn't feel especially by the numbers, just because everything is really lavish. There's an extended, like, battle, a
solid 5-minute escape scene.
Yeah, and all this, like, really, all this, like, design for this alien world that, like, someone clearly put a lot of thought into, like, giving it a particular, like, aesthetic, and it just amounts to nothing. And watching this movie again, the beginning really feels like the ending to a movie that we didn't see, because they're clearly trying to establish that this is a world in chaos. The final days of Krypton were not peaceful ones, and it set up all this drama down the line that's going to happen to Clark. And that can work, but it almost feels like it would work better if... I don't want to see a whole movie about Krypton, but I can see how someone might have made this, like, its own complete feature, where they were really exploring the themes of having this crisis, this political crisis with this kind of sword of Damocles hanging over things, where we as the audience know that Krypton is going to get destroyed, and it ends up having kind of this, like, feeling of Greek tragedy, and that's kind of what they're trying to do here, but they only have 20 minutes to do it, so it's just weirdly rushed, and it's not that interesting because the only characters who get any sort of build up or characterization are Jor-El and Zod, and Jor-El at least is not even a little bit interesting. So it just doesn't work, and we didn't need it. It would have been a lot better if we had just made this a fucking origin story, because that's what it is. I don't know why everyone gets their panties in a twist over every superhero having an origin story. It's a type of story. You can do it well, you can do it badly. It's just like any other thing. But it feels like they really did not want to make this movie an origin story and fall into those, like, tropes and trappings. And yet they still fell into those tropes and trappings anyway, because that's inevitably what it is. When you get this core, it's about Superman, like, on his way to becoming Superman, and they just did it in the most roundabout, like, stupid ass way. We didn't need any of this. We could have just focused on what Krypton did or did not mean for Clark as a character, but because we can't just cut to the chase, and we can't just, like, be upfront about, like, yes, this is an origin story, here's what we're going to do differently, maybe. You know, that's what they did for Batman Begins. A lot of people like that movie. I like that movie when it's about, like I said, Batman's origin story. But instead of doing that, they just, like, did a Cliff Notes version of what we already knew from the Christopher Reeve movies and everything else, and then had a stupid 30-minute Krypton sequence when, again, we could have just learned all the important information from Jor-El and Zod.
It really does feel like a Cliff Notes version of another movie. We have a whole plot to it that's set out, that they just cut out most of it to make it shorter. We have themes, because there's the whole, we've used all our natural resources, so our planet is dying theme. Clearly, they're going for some allusion to our own struggles with climate change, global warming, whatever, and trying to tie in our emotional investment of our own planet to Krypton. But when we don't have, it's so brief, so short, that we don't have the time to invest in anything, because we get 10 seconds of here's Krypton, it's bad, things are going wrong on it. Here's Jor-El, he's a cardboard cutout. Here's Zod, he's doing Zod things and chewing on the scenery while he does them.
I will find him!
It's insane. And so by the end of it, everyone dies with the obvious exception of Zod and his, like, 10 merry men. And I don't care. I was left completely uncaring. And here's where I'm going to use Jor-El as actually kind of an interesting microcosm of Krypton as a whole, in that Jor-El just gets stabbed and instantly dies. There's no build up to it. He's not sitting on the ground bleeding out or anything like that. He's there and then he's dead. Kind of like how this movie treats Krypton, except in, like, extended 20-minute they're dead. So it's odd. It feels like it was strangely rushed, but also didn't want to be there, but also is supposed to be a different movie. It's a weird opening that doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, it's so and, you know, I'm gonna be a shill and keep talking about, like, the old movies from the 70s. But that was the most jarring thing, I think. Like, looking back on my experience of rewatching those movies, was that literally everything that Man of Steel takes 20 minutes to do, the Christopher Reeve movies sum up in a 5-minute cut, I think, and like a 5-minute scene. It feels much quicker, at least. I don't know actually how long it is. I didn't watch it in preparation or anything. But it's
wait, yeah, you could easily, you know how you get the codex down there? You have a 5-minute thing where the council says, yes, we'll put the codex in this child and send him to Earth. And Zod somehow survives because he's in the Phantom Zone. In the same way he comes out of the Phantom Zone in this movie, which is Krypton blows up, shattering the... Who gives a shit? And he returns and he's like, I know that he has the codex. I'm going to go to Earth and get it, or something like that. I just made your opening in the movie in 30 seconds.
Especially the codex, because the codex thing is the one thing that is different about this movie, and, like, they're clearly trying to do something with the themes of, like, predestination and your role in society, and I just don't get what it's about, or, like, it never adds up to anything.
Are they themes then, or are they just, like, pretend ideas?
Pretend ideas. I can think of a lot of movies that have pretend ideas. You know, we'll be generous and call them themes for now. Yes, I'm willing to give this movie some credit in that it has ambitions, it has aspirations. It just, a lot of those aspirations were contradictory. It wants to be a smaller character study, and it also wants to be a big, loud action movie. It wants to be an origin story, but it also doesn't. And they just didn't know what the fuck they were doing. And I'll give. I'm willing to give some applause to the person who doesn't know what the fuck they're doing and tries, over the person who knows exactly what they're doing and gives pretty minimal effort, which is what I would say about like a lot of the Marvel movies, because of course that comparison is going to come up. So yeah, I mean, we'll be generous and call them themes. But as far as the whole like predestination, I don't see what that has to do with Superman as a character. Not even Superman seems too hung up on it. Really, in practical terms, it just ends up meaning that he's the MacGuffin that Zod needs, and then they fight.
That's a weird thing to realize, is that your protag is a MacGuffin.
He really is. Zod later on in the movie gives a big old speech about how Krypton will be reborn from the ashes or whatever, and Superman just doesn't give a shit. Like, he just offhand is like, Krypton had its chance. Which A, feels like a very un-Superman thing to say, and B, is just like, oh, okay, so like there's no sort of struggle there, no sort of desire to like do good to your heritage versus your new background as a human being. Like, isn't that what the movie's supposed to be about? Like, Superman wrestling with this stuff, but except it doesn't matter when he doesn't care anymore, which is all the time apparently, because Superman's a mopey dick in this.
Actually, just to kind of go back, and I apologize, you're right, of course, that he is a mopey dick. Which that's, a weird title of a book. The joke didn't land at all. Fuck.
It's there now.
Oh no. But this movie almost feels like it can't decide whether it wants Zod or Superman to be the protagonist. Because in a lot of ways, Zod is the hero of Krypton. But and Superman is his antagonist. You don't like either of them, so either of them could be a protagonist.
Well, it's a bit of a classic case of the villain maybe being more active in the story than the hero is. This has come up before. We were talking about Dio and Jonathan in JoJo, and I feel like it's actually a bit of an appropriate comparison, because JoJo is also, or not all JoJos, but that JoJo, Jonathan, is also similarly like supposed to be like a good boy character. Hang
on. Are we positively comparing this movie to JoJo? This might be the first movie that we give a positive comparison to JoJo for.
Well, I'm giving JoJo good marks here, because I think this movie bungles it a lot, actually. Because with JoJo, you could make that argument that Dio is more the protagonist, and he's kind of like Zod in that he has the more kind of interesting personal motivation at stake. Like, JoJo just doesn't like Dio because he's mean to him, and Superman just doesn't like Zod. Like, he's not even sure that Zod's up to anything bad at first. He just kind of suspects that he is.
Oh yeah, they tell you that a lot too. It's a gut feeling.
Yeah.
What does your gut tell you?
The gut feeling is that he read the script and knows that Zod's supposed to be the bad guy. But I mean, I guess to his credit, like, Zod didn't help with his super over the top like message to the world.
What was that? I'm sorry. Can we just take a second? What the hell was that? What alien life comes down and sends it like a fucking jigsaw message?
Zod had very clear goals. He wanted Clark. He wanted Superman. So the fact that he would go and, like, use, like, a spooky Instagram filter over his face and, like, obfuscate things, like, it feels like a waste of his time. I don't know why he, like, it was Zod sitting there in, like, Windows Movie Maker, like, cutting out and, like, ooh, this is a nice filter. This'll make me look scary to the humans. So, yeah, I don't know. So after that ridiculous moment, what the fuck are we talking about? Oh yeah, motivations. So Zod's got the clearer goal, he's got the clearer motivation, whereas Clark has that like ever generic, like, I just want to find out who I am. But, like, it's not even to protect Lois or protect people, because he's not even sure if he wants to protect people, and that's weird. and that might be a good segue into the next major death. The reason Superman doesn't want to protect people in this movie, and that's his Earth dad.
Which is so weird, because from what I know of Superman, his Earth dad has always been very much like you must protect everyone. It is important to save the world. With great power comes great responsibility. That type of shit. And in this, he's like, nah, let those kids on the bus drown. Who gives a shit? And I'm just taken aback. Like, in what world does Pa Kent say, maybe you should have let them drown? You know, it would have been better for you. Maybe you should have let them drown. Because that's absurd. I get the whole greater good angle for it and everything like that. But that's such an insane cost. And it's a personal cost at that. Like, if it was people in another country or town or whatever, I could see it being more of a maybe you should have let them drown. And I know that sounds heartless and insane, but there is a personal element to everyone who says, you know, the good of the many. And I personally, I'm not getting into philosophy right here.
Well, I think it's an interesting idea. I kind of do, just because, like, I think it helps with your case, and that, like, if Superman is like, if young Clark is like watching the TV news and he sees like that there's like some hostage situation in some other country that, you know, he knows he could like run to because he's really fast and like stop, and like again like Pa Kent like stops him, like that maybe where it's kind of that distant where like the public eye is already on him, that maybe lends a little bit more support to Pa Kent's case of like, you know, I know it's hard, son, like I know you don't want to watch like people suffer, but you know, you got to let things play out, like you have to make that argument for this non-intervention, whereas
it's kind of like a Prime Directive thing,
from
Star Trek.
Yeah, no, that's a really good comparison. Whereas like if Superman just lets everyone drown on the bus that he was on, and he could have stopped it, then he's responsible.
That's some guilt-laden shit, too. Okay, no, wait, I'm sorry. This is how you make a supervillain.
That totally is. And here's the thing about, like, Pa Kent, that I could understand if they had played... I would have understood him saying this more if they had played into the angle of him being, like, a concerned father, and that like he's saying this stuff that maybe sounds crazy or un-Superman-like or whatever, like just because he's really scared that like someone's gonna take his son away from him. And like that's not how they're playing it, though. They're playing it as like he's the typical like wise dad figure, like not like kind of like clouded or consumed by his emotions. Because as a character arc, like that could have maybe worked as like Superman. If you wanted to make a more, like, doubtful Superman who has to, like, kind of grow into the role, which, you know, I'm not opposed to as a character arc. I know that this version of the character gets a lot of criticism for not acting exactly like Christopher Reeve. But you know what? Like, in the old Christopher Reeve movie, that was one of the criticisms I had of it, and that, like, Superman... Basically, like, Jor-El, like, downloads his Superman persona into his brain in, like, a scene, and then he's Superman. I'm like, no, like, I think it's a good idea to, like, have him grow into the role and, like, have him be a little more unsure and then kind of achieve that ideal at the end and be really satisfying. So, like, that could have been a good arc if, like, he's his dad who's like kind of speaking from this like selfish but really personal place, is like telling him like, you know, hide your powers, like just let everyone be, like help me out on the farm. And then like by the end of the movie he kind of realizes that no, like since he has this power, he has to, you know, he has to step in when no one else will. He has to intervene and like do good because he's the only one that can. But instead we just get this insanity from Pa Kent, treated as if it's some kind of like sagely wisdom, and then for his actual death scene it plays out in like the stupidest way. Like,
oh god, yeah,
because that idea that Pa Kent doesn't want him to intervene, even if it costs him his life, I just cannot see a human being having that response, especially in the way that it's framed, with him like solemnly like holding his hand up, being like no, like as the tornado like takes him with like tranquility. Like, that's not how a real person would react. A real person would be like, oh fuck, like come on super son, like come get me. So it just reads as wrong on that level. But like, I don't believe that after saving the kids on the bus and like still having that desire to do good, I don't believe that even if Pa Kent did hold his hand up, that Superman would just be like, okay, yeah, like time to do what Dad says and let him get liquefied by this tornado. Like, that's the moment I think where Superman where we start to realize that like, as a hero, as like a good boy, like this version of Superman is not going to make the grade. Because that's the thing about having a good boy character. That's the thing about having a pure hero, is that they're deceptively hard to do well, because inevitably you're going to, get the criticism that they're not complicated enough. But I've got a soft spot for the pure hero archetype, and I think there's a way to do them well. And part of that is just having them react in like human ways and having human emotions. So like, referring back to JoJo, I don't think that Jonathan Joestar is like necessarily the best written character, but as far as like a hero goes, he's a lot more likable just because he shows some like relatable emotions. He gets sad, he cries a lot. He, that mean old Dio just like won't stop picking on him, and that really informs like when he goes on to be like, the righteous type or whatever. So it's really grounded in like that human element, and like I don't want people to like be hurt the same way that I have been. So when Superman just sort of like backs off and just stays like distant and aloof the entire movie, it makes him boring because he's not taking any action, and B, just again like a mopey dick, like a boring asshole. And sure, he saves a couple people. He saves the people on the rig, but then like, it's
his white whale. Did that one work? Did that joke land?
Keep trying.
Okay.
Or maybe don't. But yeah, I feel like the moment where Superman willingly lets his dad die. Superman willingly lets his dad die. I'm just gonna keep saying that. Superman willingly lets his dad die. That's no. If you're trying to sell your character as like, the paragon of justice, like the big blue Boy Scout, Superman shouldn't let his fucking dad die.
So I'm gonna take a much more simplistic approach to this one, and not really get into character motivations or character development, and just get into why it's stupid from a really basic standpoint. So, just to reiterate, what happens is Pa Kent decides to go save the family dog from the car as this tornado comes. Fine. That's dumb as shit when you're standing next to your superpowered son, who, and let me just pitch this out for you, can walk into it. He don't need to fly. He can walk into this tornado, hold the dog safe, and then just somehow make it out on the other side. He can like move to a different location, like he got tossed around a little bit, or whatever he wants to do. But it's totally plausible that someone lives through a tornado. People do it all the fucking time. The fact that Pa Kent's just like, don't worry about it, I'll go die, is the dumbest thing in the world. Seriously, he doesn't need to use a single superpower other than the fact that he has a little bit of a stronger balance. He can just stay on the ground the whole time and, dodge cars or whatever. No one can see him. He's in a tornado. What? Who? Where does this make sense?
And you know what? Like, thinking about it, that actually could have been, like, like maybe even kind of a fun scene or kind of a fun visual of like Superman like standing firm in the tornado, like, you know, holding the dog or whatever, as like all this crazy stuff is going on around him. Because the other thing about the tornado is that you're right, like it's not completely unbelievable that he'd survived, and it also provides the perfect cover for him to like get away. Like no one will see him.
Seriously, go like jump into a tree or something and be like, "Oh, I got tossed far away." There's any number of things that you can do with this. And instead, it's just like, nah, I'm just gonna let Dad die.
And especially because it just comes out of nowhere. Like, the flashbacks are already really poorly structured because they don't form a super coherent, like, story. Because they didn't want to do a, like, proper origin story, obviously. So it's all just little bits and pieces out of place that range from, like, some of them are okay. But most of them... Like the one where his mom's just like, just make it small, honey. Like, the world's too big, Mom. Like, that was the most, like, cringe, like, eye-rolling, inducing shit. So, like, already the flashbacks kind of suck. But this is the worst one of all of them because they're just driving along and Clark's angsting some more and having a fight with his dad. And it seems like maybe... And it's at the moment where, like, their argument, like, maybe... Pa Kent starting to come around but then just out of nowhere this tornado, like literally it's like, and suddenly tornadoes. And
yeah, they look up through a windshield at something that we can't see. We can't even see the weather outside. It's just there.
And old women are coming, and you bet that they're in this movie too, because they gotta fight Superman and Two Brothers, Man of Steel.
It is kind of like that. Like someone just improv'd something out of their ass and was just like, eh. And then there's a tornado.
And a dog in the car. But Ma Kent forgot to open the door. But Superman's there, but he's not in this movie because Pa Kent is on the case. But he doesn't want Superman to show his powers. It's Man of Steel in theaters now. DC Comics.
We know what we're doing. Yeah, no, I mean, that is honestly a spot-on representation of this scene. I can't, like, it's really accurate. It's scarily.
You know, I never thought of Man of Steel as, like, a Rick and Morty sketch, but, like, here we are.
So we're gonna jump forward now to the... infamous death in this movie. I feel like I've heard mixed things about this because Superman kills Zod, which is a big deal, and this is what really kind of solidified it as DC trying to be edgy and not your father's Superman, because Superman generally doesn't kill. It's a big deal for the good boy to make a no-no. So, for context, Zod is shooting his laser eye beams at a family, and Superman is, trying to hold his head back from actually hitting this family, and he eventually realizes that the only thing he can do to actually get Zod to stop is to snap his neck. I don't know why that's the only thing he can do in this situation. Whatever.
I mean, it's just like Pa Kent's death. The situation they staged has, like, a stupid amount of answers for, like, how it could have been avoided, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, we try not to dwell on plot holes too much, but, I mean, these are plot holes specifically around death, and it's really dumb. Like, this is really... Pa Kent shouldn't have died, Zod shouldn't have died for a number of reasons. It's all really, really dumb. So, yeah... Superman snaps Zod's neck, and that's just kind of the end of Zod.
So, I'm a little torn. Not on the execution of the scene. The execution of the scene was dumb. But on the decision to have Superman kill Zod at all. Just because...
It's so out of character?
It's out of character, but you could have played it better. And it comes down to... It brushes on a lot of problems that will continue to be problems in the DC cinematic universe. So there's some stuff I kind of want to save for the next one. But so specifically talking about Superman killing, I think that if you want to make a different version of the character, fine. But you have to make his journey, like, make sense up until that point. Like, you can sell me on, like, even though Superman normally doesn't kill, like, this one does, because Zod's, like, that much of a monster. Like, he has this code, but he's willing to make exceptions. I mean, it's the same bullshit that, like, people criticize at the end of Batman Begins, when Batman lets Liam Neeson get blown up on that train. And rightfully so. It's the same sort of situation. They still didn't do it very well. Batman Begins, at least, made that whole movie about his code. Superman, I remember when I first watched that movie, not that movie, but this movie, rather. I remember when I first watched this movie, I was surprised that people were making that big of a deal out of Superman killing Zod, because they never in the movie make it explicit that, like, that's Superman's code. Because A, he doesn't really do that much that's heroic, and B, he's never really presented with that moral quandary earlier in the movie. Because that's the thing about Superman, is that, that's kind of the common criticism, is that he's too powerful, you can't make any interesting stories about his character. You just have to approach the conflict in a little bit of a different way, where the tension isn't, is Superman going to get killed? The tension is Superman going to find a way to do the right thing? Will he make the right call in the end? Like, how there's an impossible situation. The Christopher Reeve movie is a perfect example of this. Lex Luthor has a scheme. One missile is going one way, the other missile is going the other. He's going to make Superman choose. And the way that movie resolves it is pretty infamous, but, like, that's kind of a classic, like, hero, like, has to test himself setup, where the fun or the drama isn't so much about whether or not he's going to do it, but kind of seeing how he's going to do it. Almost like a James Bond, like, death trap. Like, we know they're not actually going to kill James Bond, but, like, it's still kind of fun to watch him, like, get out of it anyway. You want to present Superman with a moral quandary, like, he has to kill Zod, or this family's going to die. Well, A, we never established that, like, killing is against this Superman's code, which he's willing to let his father die, so who knows? And B, having him make the choice to kill him, again, I can almost see a movie. I can see a universe where the movie, like, made the argument for it, but then, like, that just sort of digs down into kind of the troubling, almost, but that just kind of digs down into the troubling, almost kind of, like, fascist sort of element that these movies have, because with Superman, that's a lot more explicit. With Superman, since he's so much more powerful than, like, everyone else and can do everything, like, it's, the world basically bends to his whim, and if Superman decides he can kill, then the whole world is Superman's to do as he pleases. Like,
hi, you just described the plot of Injustice.
I know, I was saying that, and I did just describe the plot of Injustice. So, I mean, I think that's, like, the strongest reason to not have Superman kill, because that's logically where people's brains are going to go. So, like, okay, he can do anything, and he can do this. What's holding him back? His moral code. And they say that in the movie, but then it's never really illustrated, because Superman's moral code doesn't hold him back. He destroys half the city while fighting Zod, and doesn't ever, like, there's one, like, really egregious scene, where, like, a lot of it you can just chalk up to, like, there's not much Superman could have done. Like, Zod's not gonna wait for him to fight. It's not like Dragon Ball, where, like, Goku will tell the villains that they should fight in, like, an empty field so no one gets hurt, and the villains agree because they want to fight Goku at his fullest or whatever. Like, it's not like that kind of movie. So, you can chalk up some of it to Zod, Superman just, like, being unable to stop him. But there's one particularly egregious shot where like Zod kicks a tanker truck at Superman and he just kind of floats over it and lets a building explode behind him. And I'm like, no, motherfucker, you could have easily caught that truck.
But the tanker truck said Lex Luthor on it. It was a reference. Do you get it?
No, I don't get it. Why does it being Lex Luthor's truck like make it any different? He could have stopped it.
Because it's an analogy for the looming threat of Lex Luthor and Superman's ability to rise above it.
No.
Jackson, these movies are far deeper than you give them credit for, and I just don't think you really understand it because you are a Marvel shill.
To be fair, you have to be very intelligent to understand the DC cinematic universe.
I mean, we're clearly Marvel shills after we did a lot of trashing of Civil War when we did that episode.
Yeah, and after I had just said, I'll take like an ambitious failure over like a soulless hack, like doing everything perfectly.
Yeah.
So
obviously we
Marvel
just hate
shills.
DC. Let's be honest. But no, I completely agree with what you're saying in that if you wanted to make a Superman that killed or this have some weight to it, you'd have to at least let him earn it. There was nothing in this movie that earned him killing Zod, that earned this one... Wow, that was bad. That earned this wanton destruction of Metropolis. It just kind of happened because someone said it had to. Probably because the Transformers movies were a thing at the time, and still are a thing at the time. Wow, that just made me sad. But like that's my biggest complaint of all this death and destruction when I was watching this, is that it felt so much like a Transformers movie where everything just blew up because someone said, "Hey, explosion cell, make something explode."
Well, that's true, and it specifically has like a Superman related like complication to it. Just because one of the common complaints about Superman Returns, which I haven't seen in ages, so I can't comment on the quality of that movie, but one of the common complaints about Superman Returns is that it was boring because Superman just lifts things. Like, that's his only action stuff, is like lifting things up. So obviously, like, the executives or Zack Snyder or whoever was in charge of making the decision, like, wanted to make it more action focused. And again, I don't think that's necessarily like a wrong choice to make to want to like focus on the action element and like present Superman in a different way.
I forgot Superman Returns came out.
Everyone forgot Superman Returns came out until like this movie started being compared to it. I saw Superman Returns in the theaters as a kid, and I don't remember a minute of it. I remember he's got like a son. I don't know. Anyway, if you want to have him do like DBZ fight scenes, and show off like how powerful Superman is, that's one thing. But then just to go so ridiculously over the top with it and so long, like that sequence all the way up until he destroys like the world engine, like that's a finale on its own. And then we still have this final boss fight with Zod that just like tears apart the whole city and like makes buildings collapse on people. It's
an hour long.
It's just gratuitous. It's the most like masturbatory like piece of filmmaking I've seen in quite some time. And there's a way that like you could have taken that destruction and still had that element, that like really high octane, like, we want this to be a really powerful Superman. There's a way to integrate that back into the character because like people have suggested before, like this is not a new observation, but like what if like this was a Superman that was actually like dedicated to like helping people? What if this is a Superman that actually had to wrestle with that morality of like how Zod has it so much easier during this fight because he doesn't have to care about the collateral damage and Superman does. You could still have Zod like, fucking shit up, but then like you can show how Superman's like is being like hampered because he has to like, take a hit from Zod to like help a family that's like about to be crushed, or like he has to like grab someone and move them out of the way instead of like getting Zod at like an opportune moment. You could have staged the action in a way that was still had this destruction, like still kept that explosion quota in there, but like made sense to the character and like made him and like forced a change in him. And then like you could have had that lead up to the finale where he's been like wrestling with this, where like he overcomes that mental obstacle, where he's able to fight Zod at like full capacity because like figures out a way, like he removes him from the scene somehow, or like tricks him, anything instead of just the mindless like rage punch that leads to a billion 9/11s happening at once.
And like there is a level of bad taste in saying like a billion 9/11s happening at once, but I completely agree with Jackson's assessment there, largely because Metropolis is clearly New York, and it's uncomfortable to watch this happen knowing that this is totally a New York analogy. And this is not something that like I'm joking about. I actually, as I was watching this, thought, oh God, this is just New York. And they are literally knocking down buildings. This is bad. This is not good. And I'm 4 years removed from it. In 2013, it was a 4 years fresher wound. I don't know. This is insane. Especially when it came out. Now, knowing what I know, it still felt weird, but I guess it kind of lost some punch. I think the action as a whole lost some punch. The weird 9/11 allegory kept, but knowing that quote unquote no one dies during this fight is really dampening to the fight scene. Batman vs. Superman introduces this concept and effectively retcons this whole fight scene into saying, yeah, everyone lived. We're good. Batman got them out or something or other, which is dumb in and of itself, but it really minimizes any impact that this scene could have had unto itself. It just kind of becomes nothing because I know there's no worries on anything. I don't care about anything that's happening. It's just blowing up buildings for the sake of blowing up buildings. And maybe I would have felt differently had I seen it in theaters 4 years ago, but I didn't, so this is the experience I got. And it was boring, and I didn't care.
Yeah, the theater-going experience is a little bit different, just because, as I said earlier, this movie represented a bit of a watershed moment in that, and this level of destruction, and, I say, a billion 9/11s at once, not to be facetious, but to be factual, basically, because this movie really, really, like, lingers on, like, the people covered in ash and screaming and, like, the horror in their eyes, and, like, it's really evoking that imagery. But when you stop to, like, think about it, like, 9/11 was, like, a square block of the city. This is, like, the entire city. Like, this is that same level of destruction, but just, like, increased, like, exponentially. And it's a lot to take in, but 4 years down the line, looking back, it is sort of interesting how the movie was pretty divisive. I remember at the time, partially because I was on a big DBZ kick, like I got a certain amount of gratification from watching the two like super beings have this like really like physical fight that had a lot of like devastation and stuff. But like it did rub a lot of people the wrong way, in a way that something like the Avengers didn't, which had a similar like setting. It even took place explicitly in New York, but it didn't have quite the same uncomfortable implications. And this is just kind of the point where, like, as a culture, I think a lot of people just said, like, that's enough. Like, we've reached maximum, like, city destruction in blockbusters, and I don't know how much more I can take. And that's, why we're starting to see Dawn of Justice, which is, of course, like, a direct response to this movie. Civil War definitely a response to this movie. Even Age of Ultron was talking about like whether or not the Avengers are good for society or if they invite this kind of destruction, and it's still grappling a little bit of with these ideas of like collateral damage and who's responsible, and yeah, all because of the backlash against this movie, which I mean, looking back, it's definitely earned. I definitely you know, like, I'm not gonna lie and say that I didn't enjoy the pure spectacle of it when I was in the theater, but like looking at it just as a film on its own merits now, and removed a little bit from like maybe my desires and what's changed and the kind of films that I want to see, you just look at it now, and whether or not it still like strikes a nerve or makes you uncomfortable, whether or not that the 9/11 allegory remains disturbing, you just can't get around the fact that it's so excessive and extravagant. The battle scene is just so long, and there's no like character beats to mix things up until we get to that moment where Superman kills Zod, which is just completely unearned and maybe like wrong-headed to begin with. Like, maybe there is no universe where you can make a Superman that kills Zod like still the hero. Maybe you can't. So to have it end up there after this like hour of first these explosions and the world engine just like being this big blue laser in the Indian Ocean, and Superman screaming and everyone's screaming and the building's falling over and the plasma lasers going pew pew and everything, and then you get to the end of that and the characters have a moment where they celebrate a little bit and like, yay, we did it, like covered in the ashes of our co-workers, and then Zod gets up and he gives a little speech about his people, and then they have another like 20-minute fight scene. You're just like, God, let it be over.
It was rough to watch. It was uncomfortable and unpleasant, and yet somehow incredibly boring. And that's actually kind of a good synopsis of the movie, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any level that it really succeeds on, because the thing about this movie is that you're right in that like on the surface it doesn't seem like it's that bad. It's not like a Death Note level thing where you can point to it and look at all the things look at all the ways it's very obviously bad or cheap or whatever. Like, it looks like a real movie. It hits beats. It hits beats that it's supposed to. It has some sort of semblance of a structure, but then like when you really like look at the individual parts and how they all fit together, you're just like, man, this is actually like really incoherent, like really not good.
Yeah, it misses on almost every mark it takes. It's just a loud, explosive mess in the second half and a quiet, dull mess in the first half.
A pretentious mess in the first half too. Like all the characters, like this is like the Christopher Nolan kind of dialogue at its worst. Because I know The Dark Knight gets that criticism a lot, where the characters will kind of like philosophize at each other, but at least like the actions that people take in those movies like reflect their philosophies. Like, it's relevant. Whereas here it's just like Pa Kent basically saying, you're going to be so great and important and inspirational, Clark. Like, this is what Superman means to people. And then, like, he just doesn't do anything the whole movie. So it's the fact that the dialogue is pretentious and overly, like, expository and dumb is, like, really a lot more noticeable here.
Man of Steel, the movie where everything blows up and the dialogue doesn't matter. With that, though, we are going to wrap it up. I have been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. I'm also on Twitch, streaming every week on Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday at twitch.tv/helpless_Skippy. Additionally, this Saturday, I'm going to be hosting a charity stream with our mutual friend Sam, aka Punished Sam, all day. If you stop by, there will be a donate link down below into the stream. It is for the Extra Life Day of Play. All proceeds from the donations will be going to Columbus's Nationwide Children's Hospital. So please stop by, donate some money, hang out and watch the stream for a little bit.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me over at Jackson J. Keller on Twitter, where stuff happens. Not like Man of Steel.
As always, we would like to thank Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. Go check that out. And as we alluded to in the beginning, we are going to be doing 4 weeks of DC Universe movies. We did Man of Steel this week, obviously. We are doing Batman vs. Superman next week, which I am dreading with about every fiber of my being. After that, we are doing Wonder Woman, which I am very much looking forward to. I've seen that movie twice already, and it's great. And we're going to cap it all off with Justice League, which God only knows what's going to happen there. And we might end up with a quick bonus episode somewhere in the middle there talking about Suicide Squad. We'll see. And in closing, here's Pa Kent advocating for child death.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe. Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go